However, we're talking now about lost culture, and lost culture is what I'm concerned about. I would like to see enough money available to the Aboriginal community to be able to take busloads and busloads of Aboriginal kids from urban and rural East Coast and their families and take them up for weeks, 6 months at a time to remote areas so that they can reconnect with their culture. I would really like to see that happen. Of course, for many, many years, white Australia has felt that it was pretty important to bring the odd Aboriginal child down and show them that there is a thing called an ocean. But, oh, Michael, I see you up there. Listen, mate, all those years, all those months and months at the embassy was well worth your while. Well worth it. Okay, now, the question you raised about unity, this is a pressing issue at this point in time. If we can't all get together in the way for many years I would say we are never going to be as united as we were in 1972. Well, let's make 2012 the year of real unity. Okay, leadership. Unfortunately, the Aboriginal community over the years has found our leaders selected for us by the press or by white politicians. And as a result, we have people like Noel Pearson who said Aboriginal people are on the comfortable pedestal of welfare as welfare recipients. And he said the problem is they've got to learn to step down before they can step up again on the pathway to equality, economic and social equality. Now, the way I look at it, if you're up to your neck to here in SHIT, when you're standing on the pedestal, there ain't no way I'm ever going to step off it. And the reality is that we've got to have Aboriginal money in Aboriginal hands. Now, Barb, I'm sure, will be able to tell us when she's talking about the constraints that are on the Northern Land Council, because everything they spend has to go through some government body for approval. So they cannot even send a busload from each of the major communities to places to come down like this. They can't spend the money in any way they want it. It has to be approved by whites. So when we're looking at the issue of sovereignty and of unity and of land rights, which we're losing all the time, then we've also got to look at the question of economics and find how can we set up an economic structure which the government cannot touch. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to use the Australian banking system, because there's not a bank in Australia that the powers that be can't pass another law and take our money out of it. So we're going to have to start looking at international banking. We've got to start looking at international legal frameworks, and we've got to start looking at the next generation of leaders. And that doesn't mean jumping great leaps and bounds and going for people who are not much more than teeny boppers, in my opinion, because now I'm a whole 75. Everybody's a teeny bopper to me. But anyway, you know, there's lots and lots of very serious issues that we have to take up over the next few days, and then it's forward together in a way that will be dramatic, will be productive, and will be the hope for our future and our children's future.
Now we're going to break for lunch in 5 to 10 minutes, but there's an opportunity for the people in the audience. If you have comments or any questions to ask of Pat, if you raise your hand, I can see one hand. Any others at this stage? Okay. Put us in the front row, Dennis.
My name's Dennis Eggington. I'm a Noongar man from WA. It's very interesting to see the symbolism of Black America in there, and I think Australia needed a little bit of black power at that stage of our history to, I guess, frighten people into understanding that, well, we can get angry when we want to get angry. The other thing that was interesting is the lack of the Aboriginal flag. So it was pre the black, red and yellow flag time. And when we're talking about black American symbolism, the afro and the black power, it's interesting to see that we tried to create a national unity with the flag, a pan-Aboriginality, if you want to call it that. Pat, I'm not one for taking kids from urban areas and taking them up and showing them culture elsewhere. I think we've got enough in our own communities to create and build on what we've got so that in the years to come, it's pretty daunting to go onto country and people show you where they were born and their grandparents were born and others. It gives you a sense of, sometimes a sense of longing and not having. The symbolism of the Tent Embassy, and can I too pay my respects to Michael, who, along with all those others, were a driving force behind people all over this country. But an embassy in our own, treated as a foreign people in our own, the symbolism of it, is it time to change that symbolism? Is it time to say it's not an Aboriginal Tent Embassy anymore, it's our sovereign government? Is it time to rethink? I'm only just saying that, putting it up to the panel, that is it time to change that symbolism? I'm not, just put it to you anyway.
Thank you. Another question here. Comment.
What I think I got out of that was, my name's Fred Hooper. I'm a Murray man from northwest New South Wales, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today. I think what I got from that film was that there were people there that said we had enough. We're not going to put up with it anymore. And that's what we've got to get back to, because I think we've been sold out as Aboriginal people, and we've been sold out by money and greed by a lot of our own mob. I think it's time that we say to the government, we're not going to participate anymore. We're not going to sit around your tables anymore unless you come and talk to us about real sovereignty. We've fallen into the mistake of sitting around their corporate tables. The so-called leaders. And I saw a program on the APAC channel the other day where they handed over this great big report into changes to the Constitution. You know, in that report, they talk about sovereignty. But in the recommendations, they say, we don't want to talk about sovereignty because it might upset the white fellas. And we might not get through our recommendations in a referendum. You know, I think it's time for all of us to say we've had enough. The same as what those people said in 1972. We've had enough of all this crap that's going on. We've had enough of the mining companies coming in and taking all of our land and taking all of our resources, right? And in that report, it says that Captain Cook came here under instructions from the Admiralty. But they're not taking any notice of that. They're worried about how's it going to impact on all them white fellas out there. You know, and I think it's time for us to stand up and say, we have had enough. And the only way that we can say that, we've got to get all of those other fellas on board as well. The Noel Pearsons, Sam Jeffries, all of those people that sit on these committees. You've got to get them on board because they're the people that they're taking notice of. They're not taking notice of the traditional owners and the little people that are on the ground. The people in Brewarrina that has 99% unemployment or 90-odd% unemployment. They're not listening to those people. They're listening to the so-called leaders of this country. And it's time for us to say, they don't represent us. They don't represent us as traditional owners. We've got to get back to traditional owner roots, and we've got to build a foundation from there. And we have to have a sovereign government. And I agree with you, brother. I think it's time for us to say, this is the Aboriginal sovereign government of Australia. And that's what we need to get to. Because if we don't get to that, and if we don't get to unity of all the nations in Australia, all the Aboriginal nations, then we're wasting our time. We're going to come back here in 12 years' time or 20 years' time or 30 years' time, and we're still going to be asking the same questions. Okay? Why are our diabetes rates going up? Why are our kids being taken off us? Still taken off us?
Yep.
Right? Why is there an alcohol problem in Australia? Why is a drug problem increasing in Australia? You know? That's the questions that we've got to ask. And the only way we're going to move forward...
into petrol in the Northern Territory.
That's right. And the only way we're going to move forward is say, we're not going to participate with you anymore, the government. And we've got to get those people not to participate as well. Because they're the ones that are influencing the government policies. They're the ones that are influencing the government in their decision making.
Yep.
But they're not listening to us, so that's where I think we need to get to.
Okay, I agree with everything you were saying there, brother. That's really, really good. We have been talking now about sovereignty for 40 years. It is time we stopped talking about it and started doing. The only ones who can declare us as a sovereign nation is us. We can't sit around and wait for the white government to do it. They can talk about the changes in their constitution all they like, but that's their constitution. It's not our constitution. And if we are going to have unity, we have to start talking to each other, and we all have to be prepared to negotiate. We all have to be prepared to give ground and back off a little bit and not be dogmatic about what the end result is going to be, whether it's this framework or that framework. It's going to take a bit of bashing through, but we've got to stand up to that. We've got to get moving in a positive direction, because we've seen for 40 years that the rest of the world, they're going to be a bit sympathetic, but they're not really going to do much for us, while ever we are just a racial minority in Australia. We have to have that sovereignty, national identity, whatever you want to call it. Sovereignty, national identity, exactly the same thing. We've got to be seen to be prepared to stand up and fight for what is ours. And even though we know that when the intervention started and they took the army into the top end, all the army did, the soldiers came back with quotes like, after 18 months, they were told they'd done a good job. And he said, what job? All we did was lie around under the shrubs with our head on our knapsack and our rifle lying beside us and napped. You know, we had our little sleeps. But they didn't realise that the potential violence involved in having that gun lying right there beside them against Aboriginal history, which whites don't want to talk about, because they've never come close to identifying how many Aboriginal people were killed in that first 50 years or 60 years. They've never come close to it. You know, they decimated my grandmother's people. Decimated. I did say decimated, didn't I? Anyway, the reality is that we have to have a certain amount of goodwill, which has been particularly missing in the Aboriginal community. We have to be prepared to listen to each other, and then we have to be prepared to give ground. An 80% victory is a victory. Or when I was a student, you don't need 100% of everything you want. But if we can all get to a place where we're all agreed on 80%, that would be fantastic. When I was a student at uni, I used to say, I don't need to get, it'd be nice to have a high distinction or a distinction, but I don't need to get them. All I really need is a pass. And that's what we've got to do, come together in unity. All we need is to understand and listen to each other.